Hello, here's my drawing of Johnny Depp as Captain Jack Sparrow in Pirates of the Caribbean. I did this a while back, but now I'm going to do a narrated video, a longer narrated video, because I think the drawing deserves it. This is the tool I used, this charcoal pencil. So I'm going to take you through the drawing process. One of the first things that you'll notice here is that I'm using a very short pencil. Now normally when a pencil gets that short from sharpening, you'd put it in a pencil holder, but I didn't have one at hand. I must have misplaced it, so I just decided to draw without it, and it didn't really bother me much. The pencil I'm using, by the way, here is a Kohinoor Gioconda charcoal pencil. It's a pretty good charcoal pencil in my opinion because it can be sharpened pretty well. It doesn't break very often. It's hard enough to sharpen and hold the tip, and at the same time it's soft enough to work with comfortably and to blend. The other thing that you'll notice is that sadly my head will keep butting in. I didn't have my camera set up that well, so whenever I would move in to work on the detail, my head would obscure a part of the shot. So I'm sorry about that. I tried to edit out the parts where my head is obscuring most of the drawing, but I couldn't remove all of it. There's not much you can do about it now other than not watch the video, which I don't recommend. So as you can see, I'm working on the Captain Jack Sparrow's facial features right now. And even though there will be background also eventually, I decided to start from his face and the hat and everything. So I'm using my usual approach of drawing some of these darker lines, darker areas, and then I'm going to proceed from there. I'm working on the eyes now, and now I grabbed a tortillon and I'm using it to soften some of these lines as well as spread that charcoal and draw around the eyes with it, because you can also draw with your tortillon when it has some charcoal on it. You can use it where you don't want clear lines or sharp lines that you would get with a pencil. So with a tortillon you get softer, lighter lines and softer transitions. You can use it in places where you don't need clean edges to value, but you can also use it to soften and spread the charcoal around and even shade some parts of the face. You can make these tortillons yourself, but it doesn't really matter. They all get the job done, even though I think that the ones I make myself generally tend to be made of softer paper, and they're a little bit softer and fuzzier, so they tend to work a little bit better. I'm working on the hat now. I'm going to use that tortillon to blend and if I'm going to want to have some texture on that hat, so if I feel that I blended it too much and that I remove the texture too much, I'm just going to go over it again with the charcoal pencil. But as you can see, I'm going to have to shade the head so that I can show its unusual shape. Now I'm using the brush to spread the charcoal on the face and add some mid-tone, and then I'm gonna proceed with the drawing of the facial features. I kept adding a little bit more value in making these eyes a little bit thicker because he's wearing a lot of makeup, and occasionally I had to interrupt recording to stand back from the drawing and look at it from a distance to see whether the bigger shapes are looking okay. So eventually I had to interrupt the recording to make the eyes a little bit more pronounced, to put down a little bit more shadow around them because of all the makeup. And there's my head over there, obscuring your view. I hope it won't last too long. So like I said, I had to lean in to draw some of the facial features, and because I was recording top down, I didn't get the angle right, so my head was often in the way, but I think for much of the footage you can still see what I'm doing. It's just that it's a little bit annoying at times, I guess. I'm back to working on the head, and as you can see, I've reinforced the darker areas around the eyes here, because I felt like there just wasn't enough makeup around the eyes. So I've done some of the work on the face off camera, and apart from just a little bit of shading and just a little bit of work on the chin and the goatee, the face is mostly done. So now it's mostly going to be the hat and the hair. The hat has this wavy shape, so I have to shade in these darker areas and try to create an illusion like some parts of it are folded in and the others are sticking out. So the lower part around the rim of the hat is also darker. And again, I'm using a combination of blending tools, using a Tutilian and a brush. I have often talked about the differences between a brush and a Tutilian when it comes to blending, and I even have a separate video about that, but the Tutilian tends to remove much of the lines and texture. The brush tends to preserve some of that texture. I've moved on to the left portion, or left side of the drawing, and now I'm working on the hand holding that wheel. There's a bunch of rings and some sort of gloves without fingers. Much of his clothes and gear is kind of ragged and old and worn out. So I immediately liked this reference photo, but as I was working I decided that I want some kind of background, and eventually I decided to draw some clouds and the sea behind him, and I think it worked out, as you will see. This is one of my favorite drawings of Jack Sparrow that I did, and I kind of regret not doing it on a larger format, on a larger piece of paper. This was about 8 times 11.5 inches in size. I probably should have done it on a larger piece of paper. So I'm working on the hand. The hands are often a little bit frustrating because when we draw we feel like they are less important than the face and some other things, but if you oversimplify the hands, it's just going to ruin the whole impression. It's just going to ruin the drawing. So you have to pay attention to the hands as well, so that they look realistic. And I'm shading the areas in between the fingers and under them where he is holding that wheel. The wheel is made of wood, and I have to shade it so that parts of it look kind of glossy. Now there's this large belt around across the chest with a large buckle and some folds here in the sleeves of his jacket. You can see how easy it is to draw these with charcoal. You just draw some of these darker areas and these darker folds, and then I'll just go over them with a brush or a tortillon and then go back with a pencil eraser, and voila, you have realistic looking clothes. I changed my mind here. I decided to do it with a tortillon, and I do think in most cases tortillons work a little bit better when drawing clothes and when drawing these folds, but obviously it's always best to combine different types of blending tools. So you can see that I'm spreading that now, and these lines are getting softer, and I'm getting a nice mid-tone. When you draw clothes, you often don't have to look at your reference photo. You just draw some of the darker areas to make some suggestions of folds, and then you, as you go over them with a tortillon, you know, there are happy accidents, and these folds and shapes just present themselves to you, and you go with the flow. But it's important here to have enough contrast between the wheel and the clothes, so that the wheel stands out in the foreground, so that we have a clear idea that this is a separate object. And I'm going to work on that a little bit. I did most of the work with that short charcoal pencil, but as you can see, occasionally I also used a little bit of black colored pencil for some of the detail where I felt like I needed more precision. And now I used a pencil eraser to draw these highlights so that the shapes on the wheel really stand out. And now this buckle. It's made of metal, so I'm going to want some contrast there as well. Now you can see that I'm using a pencil eraser to draw some of the highlights on the sleeve. So these are folds in the clothes, and the raised parts need to be a little bit lighter. He has all kinds of stuff in his hair, so I'm kind of simplifying that a little bit. He has a weird goatee that's braided, so I'm drawing that too. He has some beads on it as well. Oh, and by the way, here where these earrings and chains are on the right, in order to preserve those white spaces, I just used a pointed stick to create indentations so that these would remain white when I go over them with a pencil. And this is the same technique that I use when drawing white hair. I just use a stick to create a score in the paper, and then when you go over that with a pencil, that area just remains white. So that was the case here, because I wanted an area of high contrast so that it does look like earrings, you know, so that it looks like metal. And really stands out. I'm moving on to the right side of it. Here's this buckle that I was talking about. And the neck obviously is going to be a lot darker. So you can see how nicely these earrings stand out now. And there are also some beads on the left as well. I'm going to post a series of videos on Pirates of the Caribbean. I did a narrated video on a drawing of Will Turner. So I'm going to do a time-lapse for that one as well, and I was also planning to draw the Black Pearl. That'll be a fun drawing. So I'm going to be posting those as well, and maybe a time-lapse of the Johnny Depp larger portrait that I did a while back. This was one of the earlier drawings when I started recording videos for YouTube, and you can see some of the flaws in my recording setup. I think the footage is of decent quality so that you can see most of the detail, and I hope that some of my narration is useful to you. But I generally often repeat myself because I usually talk about the same things over and over again, It's just that I don't know if this is the first time somebody's watching my video. You can see how I'm drawing the sleeve on the right now, on his left arm. You sort of have to try to imagine how the clothes would fold around a certain body part. And after that you add some mid-tone, you blend it, and then draw the highlights. This is the approach that I use over and over again, and it works for me. Like I said about these Coquino charcoal pencils, fairly easy to blend because they're relatively soft, but still I found that they're relatively easy to sharpen as well. They don't break that often at all. So those are some of my favorite charcoal pencils. In addition to those, I also use Woodless charcoal pencils. Those are even better if you can find any Woodless charcoal pencils. These hardly break at all because it's easy to sharpen them. One of the charcoal pencils that I wasn't really happy with was Faber-Castell. Faber-Castell generally have the best pencils, and the charcoal is really soft and dark, but the thing is that I just couldn't sharpen them. I just couldn't get them to get sharp and create a tip. They just kept breaking. So, you know, that's kind of a big deal for me. I just want a tool that I can work with. I decided that this lower area needed a little bit more darker value, so I added a little more charcoal there. And the wheel is now almost completely done, just a little bit of blending. It's a very nice scene, and like I said, I decided to add a little bit of background to it, a few clouds. Some braids in here, and he's wearing a band or a scarf around the head. So I'm just going to draw some highlights with a pencil eraser here. Finish the jacket. Just a few simple highlights, and the jacket looks a lot more complex, like I put a lot of work into it, even though I didn't. So now I'm moving on to the background. And I first used the Tortillion to make some suggestions, clouds in the back. I'm going to make sure that the top edge or the top part of those clouds is a lot lighter, and the edge is a little bit cleaner, and that there is more contrast between the clouds and the background there. And I'm going to fade the bottom of these clouds a little bit darker, shade it a little bit darker. So I kind of carelessly went over that part of the sky with a charcoal pencil. I probably should have used charcoal powder, but eventually I'm going to find a way to blend it and make it softer, because the Tortillions get the job done eventually. Plus, if I feel there's too much texture, I can always add a little bit of white chalk on top, and that makes the area even softer. But now I left that for a second to work on these clouds a little bit, to give them a little more shape and volume. So clouds, like any other object, they have to be shaded, and the light is coming from above, so they have their lighter and darker portions just like any other object. You can't just leave them white, even though sometimes they do appear that way in the sky. I'm also adding a few details with a pencil eraser, trying to make these edges a little bit more wispy, to make them look like clouds a little bit more. And my lighting changes a little bit here and there because I was using daylight. So now I'm moving on to the right side, the right portion of the background. As you can see, I blended and softened the left side pretty well. There's going to be some more clouds here on the right side as well. And I'm blending the background with the Tutillion here again. You can see how much nicer the scene looks with a little bit of background and clouds here. I'm going to add the sea here in the distance, and just some minor, small suggestions of waves. Shade that a little bit and blend it. And shading the lower part of the cloud a little more so that it's darker and it's getting lighter towards the top where it's getting more light. Here is the finished drawing. I skipped over a part of the footage here which was just mostly blending, but I'm just going to use this black color pencil to add a few details to his ragged clothes here and there. Just a few final details, few final marks. And I can also soften these as well with the Tutillion to integrate them better into the rest of the drawing. I'm going to sign it here. There it is. That's my finished drawing of Johnny Depp as Captain Jack Sparrow. You can also check out the time-lapse video with some nice music. Thanks for watching.